going to be some deep end stuff today. Don't panic too much. Swim in it, and see that actually what I'm hoping we can gradually do is throw you a life buoy, like those little circles as you're swimming, trying to understand all of this stuff. All of this will again help your flowchart, but I make sure I give you a good amount of information because I also want it to help in your final assignments as well. And hence the reason why I'm wanting to put the videos up online for you all. And I really want to say thanks for those of you who have contacted me, particularly that aren't in the BYD, to say how useful this is. And I will, at the end of the course, when we're finished, I will get some feedback from you all as to how you've experienced the course. But anyway, whether you're in qualitative or quantitative research, there's one word that both of the research styles use, and that word is sampling. Sampling. To put it very, we'll go straight in here. To put it into a usable understanding, the first word that you have to understand is population. And in a research study, that means everyone. So if I was to do a study on New Zealanders, then everyone in the population of New Zealand counts for that study. But if I was to do a study of young people's experiences of alternative education, that population is every young person who's experienced alternative education. Now, if I haven't framed that to be within New Zealand, then I'm saying every young person globally who's had an experience of alternative education. But I would better frame it as every young person in New Zealand has an experience of alternative education. So you have this population. Your sample is a piece of the cake of the population. So your cake is the population, and the piece that you take out is a sample. Okay? And the idea of the sample is it's going to tell you a story about the population as a whole. If you're doing quantitative research, it really does have to be able to generalise to that population. So I'd be able to, and some of the studies I've done at NZCER about NCEA where we have research for schools, I'd be able to confirm with a really good sample that because, and this is true, because 95% of students who do NCEA will only do the activities given to them at school if the activity is going to give them credits. That's their personal opinion. Unless I get credits, what's the use doing it? Because 95% of young people feel that way. And this sample that we took at NZCER, because the sample is really good, we can say that pretty much across New Zealand, 95% of young people in education will actually only consider doing activities if they get credits for it. Now, I can also disprove that as well, because in the focus groups, in our mixed part of that methodology, where we went to talk to young people, we would say, well, are there things that you do at school that you enjoy? Oh yeah, sports. Drama club, do you get credits for it? Not all the time. See, even though you think that way, actually there's a little bit of more complexity to your story. The only type of research that asks everyone in a population is a census, because it goes to every single person, basically. And by law, you're meant to fill out the census. If you don't fill out the census, then you can actually be fined. And the census becomes really important because we get pictures of what's happening in terms of smoking, what's happening in terms of education, what's happening in terms of wealth across our whole population. Now, there are two types of sampling. There's the one that quantitative researchers love and swim in. That's called random sampling, and we'll go into that a little bit more. And one that quantitative researchers don't really like that much, and that's called non-random sampling. So random sampling and non-random. Difference, one is random, one is not random. Okay? And in quantitative research, the sample size is incredibly important. Some people would say the bigger the sample is, the better. No, what ends up happening, and you don't have to know all these stats, even when you finish your degree, you don't have to know these stats. If you decide to go on and do a master's, and you want to have a quantitative focus, then you will learn these stats. But there are stats that you can use to determine whether the sample that you've got say whether it's 20 or 100 is representative of the whole population that you are researching. Okay? But in general perspectives, if you're seeing quantitative stats, you do want to know that they've got a big sample, particularly if they're starting to say things about their research findings and starting to say that these research findings apply to everyone. If they're not doing that, then they're being safe. The key thing, though, that researchers hide, and when you get into evidence-based practice next year, this is a key thing to understand that may be hidden and not talked about at all, and that is the response rate. So I might have a really good sample. It might be that I'm deciding I'm researching NCEA and I'm researching a selection of schools that we've picked, and we're asking every single young person in those schools to respond to a questionnaire.
So the students are the sample?
The students are the sample, yeah. And I've got the schools, I've got the students, but ethics means informed consent. They don't have to do it. So only 12 people in that school of 100 people or 500 people answer my questionnaire. I've got a good sample. I could argue I've got a good sample size, but automatically that sample size plummets with the response rate. And it was a really good example of a piece of research that was done about young people in New Zealand that is a demonstration of how risky that is. One, of a sample not being representative. Two, of them generalising. And three, the response rate was really bad. And that was a piece of research that Youthtown did on young people and technology. And Youthtown found that pretty much in the 90s, so I can't tell you the exact percentage, but in the 90s, we'll say 98% of young people in New Zealand use technology every day. Now, a lot of us would agree with that, and I'd say, yeah, that's because that's our common sense thinking. But there were some real problems with Youthtown's research. One, the population was all young people in New Zealand. Two, the sample that they selected was young people who were online at home on a computer and whose parents had access to, I've lost the name of this, a survey, it was like Smile City or something. Not Survey Monkey, that's an actual, it was something like Smile City, which they send out surveys to all their clients, and my mum loves it because she gets points. If you fill out the survey, you get points, and then you can buy stuff in a shop.
Oh, true.
Well, my question, and my students were really good, they pointed this out, was the problem with this was the sample size, and the sample did not actually fit the population. The sample size was really small in the end because it was only these Smile City people, and not everywhere. I can tell you that most teenagers do not use Smile City. So we do not know actually who filled out that survey. It could have been the parents filling it out on their kids' behalf to get points so they could go and buy something. Added to all of this, it didn't take into account the young people who don't have access to technology at home. So the whole thing was biased, even though they claimed they could generalise it to everyone.
Excuse me.
Yep.
So how often do researchers get held to account?
That wasn't a proper research group, but in the journal articles they will get held to account.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at journal articles and that, it's actually quite good to look at what's happening with the response rate. So when they say they selected X amount of people, and this is what's going to help in the evidence-based practice, and then only such and such, so few people responded, or everyone responded, what makes the Dunedin study incredibly important for health and well-being is that their sample size is huge, okay? I say it's got problems now because it only really pertains to the generation of 1973 when it started, but it has got some interesting findings when it comes to nature and nurture. But the thing that's been really strong about the Dunedin study is we call it attrition, which is when the sample size gradually drops, okay? So it's attrition, but that the sample size or the sample response rate to that study has remained consistently high all the way through. And part of the reasons for it is that they are incredibly thankful to their participants as researchers. They actually go, thank you for participating. If you want to remain in the study and you live in England, we will pay for you to come to New Zealand.
Wow.
If you want to be in the study and you're in a prison in the United States, our researchers will go over to you. If you're using meth and you tell our researchers about it, we won't disclose it to the police. And that's a lot of what, and I've actually been in a situation where one of the participants I was researching had just broken into a house and was asking me to look at all of her goods. And I, as a researcher, I'm formally bound by my code of ethics. So the confidentiality clause means that I couldn't dob her in.
True.
It put me in this real...
Moral dilemma.
Yeah, there are situations that if we're researching, we will actually say to people there are things that you might say to us that we have to disclose. One of those, particularly if we're working with young people, is disclosure to child abuse. So that's...
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I think that question that Kat asked is really, really a good question, because holding researchers to account for misrepresenting outcomes and statistics can be, if the media starts to run with things, can create false pictures about our country, and people can form then false perceptions.
Yeah, and I totally agree and I with all of this, because actually the reality is researchers can be really, really biased. When I was doing the NCA project, one of the researchers I was working with loved science, and she would get me to read every piece of statistics so that I could answer her leading question in the way that she wanted it answered. So researchers can be really, really biased. And I think that, I'm not a fan of the Dunedin study at all, but I am a fan of the respect that the researchers have shown their participants, because in that way, they've been able to keep a genuine story all the way through, and that's an example of a solid quantitative piece of research that's happened now since 1973. Thank you. So, I'm just going to check what order I put these in. Yeah. So in qualitative research, sampling isn't as much about generalising to a whole population. So what it really wants to do is, from a population, is tell a story that is unique to a group of people within that population. There's no way a qualitative researcher can go and get a story that's going to represent everyone. You know yourself, your story is unique. And there'll be aspects of your story that you share with others, but every time something else enters into your life, your story changes. So qualitative researchers are wanting to draw stories out of a population, not generalise stories to a whole population. And they recognise that their research is going to be biased. So I will definitely say in my research with young people, and when I was giving these stories to the United Nations, I would definitely say, look, the stories that I'm giving only come from a select group of young people around New Zealand. These young people represent a variety of communities, but there are young people that aren't represented in these stories at all. For example, my bias here, West Coast youth, I did not go and research, so therefore I know that my story, even if it was of young people on the west coast of the North Island, it wouldn't be the same as the young people on the west coast of the south. So I would openly admit that as a researcher. But when I do select my participants, I am selecting them purposely so that they actually are able to answer my question. It's no use saying I want to look at how young people use drugs, and I'm not talking to a single young person who's used drugs. Tell me your story about drug use. You didn't really use, do you? Okay. So then it'll be very hollow research. So I'm always looking for phenomena. That's what I mean, for people who match what I'm researching, the phenomena I'm researching. Or the topic. I throw these big words in there to stick.
How is it that it's possible to do research on people that are harming themselves by taking P or something and not? How does that fit with your ethics? Because to me it doesn't sound particularly ethical, and it's potentially harmful and even lethal.
These are the tricky questions that I have to say to you. I'm wrapped with this class and how far you've come, because those sorts of questions are huge. Researchers, there are two groups of researchers on that. I would only, if I was researching a particular topic like that, I only research people who are actually actively in some form of therapy.
Yeah.
So I'm not taking the role of the therapist, but I know that they are, and I've been involved in these sort of research projects where actually directly after a session with me, they're required to go and have a session with their therapist. So
it's biased.
no, it's not biased. Oh, no, well, it's biased towards people who are in therapy.
Yeah.
It's safe.
But it means that, and this has been particularly in cases of abuse. If a young person's sitting down with me and talking about the abuse that they've experienced, then rather than me going, this is confidential, I don't need to carry it, the young person can dump everything on me. With confidentiality, it means that I can frame their story in such a way that it becomes their story, but it's not, the rest of the world's not seeing their face attached to their story. And then after they've talked to me, they can go and have a talk to a therapist and get that. So rather than me saying I have to tell a therapist, they're already engaged in therapy. And right to the point that I've paid for it myself. So I've actually paid for a counsellor to be available. I paid full counselling costs for someone to access a counsellor straight after. So it's built into the costs. But there are other researchers who go, we really want to know these experiences, we want to know them authentically, we have to run that confidentiality, and they will do this research and have really very little protection around the person at all.
And that's legal.
Back to what ethnographic, ethnographic research, you just go with the flow of what people would.
Yeah, but in an ethnography, ethnographic research, you would just be in that community, relax in that community. You'd have to have a lot of supervision, so you can debrief. I find it a difficult tightrope to walk. You know, I could do ethnography, but I couldn't do that sort of ethnography because I'd be finding myself pulled. It's on research around suicide often. Again, a therapist is used straight afterwards, but on suicide, I should say, if a person discloses that they're going to take their life, even a researcher will break the rules on that.
So there is a limit.
Just
There is a limit, yeah.
And the counsellor that the researcher pays for,
Mm-hmm.
is that so that it makes it right for them, or is that a genuine interest in the
But someone like,
their research?
I'll be honest with me, it's an interest in the person, and those that know me in the BYD will know that I don't give two hoots about people. But there are some researchers, it's just like it's an ethics thing. So on the ethics application, when we say no harm, because harm can be talking about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So and people, you all know that harm can be talking about stuff. So they'll actually put, we will ensure that a counselling session will be, if it's applied afterwards, paid for from our research grant or from our own funds, and then it'll be accepted by the research committee. And so it becomes a tick box thing for the researcher, and I've actually known researchers who actually have put it in as a tick box and not followed up on it. So researchers can, as we found out last week with the Cartwright inquiry, researchers can be some of the most dangerous people around.
Yeah.
Yeah? They've got the potential to cause real harm. There's a limit to what they. I think in general that researchers are quite. I don't think they're as harmful as they used to be. I hope. Well, they do give horse tranquilizers, as we found out in Dunedin last week. But I don't think they're intentionally as harmful as they used to. Were they intentional? I don't think they are as harmful as they used to be, due to ethics. But and if they are, when they are brought into question, and hence why it's important as professionals. You know, if someone says to you, "You need to try this new treatment," and you find yourself questioning the treatment, if you're able to read the research study behind it and say, well, look, they're claiming they tried this on 200 people, but really only 2 people went through the program. I'm not using this treatment. I don't think the research is sound that you're using to tell me I have to use this treatment.
What kind of bodies are there around to, not police, but, make sure that the researchers are being ethical?
The Health Research Council in New Zealand is the key one for researchers outside of universities and polytechnics. In a polytechnic and a university, we have our own research ethics committees. But at Welltech, I would assume, because I don't get involved too much in the big dangerous activity research, but I would assume that, say, if it's a massive health and wellbeing project, that they would also go to the Health Research Council, because I know that that would be what would be required to do at VIC.
Might be good to do some questions around that for our, yeah, interesting.
And the Health Research Council is very staunch, and like that Cartwright Inquiry guy last week said perhaps they're going too far on the informed consent stuff, but that's because researchers like to know that, researchers see that if you give everyone the information, then the research in itself becomes biased. This is how a researcher would think. So like that example I gave you of the bystander effect with someone lying down on the pavement and everyone walking past, well, if we had to give informed consent to everyone that walked past, they would know that they're walking past someone lying on the pavement, and we want to gauge what their reaction's going to be. Guaranteed that 100% of people will help that person that's lying on the pavement. The only reason why we know that they won't is because, apart from Cliff, is that the majority of the research of that particular phenomenon has been done without informed consent. So people haven't known that they've been part of that. So that would be, in that sort of situation, you see it done on TV quite a lot, and you can see the faces of the people, but that's a television program sort of thing. But if it was a researcher, we wouldn't be showing those people's faces. We wouldn't be disclosing any names if we knew names. There'd be no way that we would make the people that walk past a person lying on the pavement identifiable. So, okay, here's the truth. Okay, so this is how they research, how they sample, and the quantitative stuff. I'm giving you some words now. The first one is simple random. What that means is that your chance of being selected for a research project is the same as the person next to you, which is the same as the person next to you, which is the same as the person next to you. Everyone's names or something about them goes into a bucket, and name by name by name is drawn out. It's a lotto. Everyone has the equal chance of being selected. That's the type of sampling that people, researchers in the quantitative field would go as the best type of sampling in the world. Simple, random. Everyone has got an equal chance of being selected. The next one, which I've been involved in quite a bit, is systematic sampling. It's not quite random. Everyone's name is on a list, or everything that's been, it could be like every school was on a list or something, and I'll roll a dice and it says 6. And I go down that list, and every sixth person, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Rose, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Lisa, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Richard. So every person at a particular interval is selected for that study. The next one is stratified. What is that? This is the problem, is that they love to use lots of big words. So stratified is we'll grab particular groups where we know populations are. So schools are a really good example. Hospitals, we know that there are differently populations in these groups, and we sample inside those groups. Now stratified sampling may be proportional or disproportional. Now what do I mean by that? Proportional means that basically I might have in these groups, and I'm stratifying on variables as well, such as ethnicity, gender, etc. And ethnicity, gender, I've lost my demographics in my head. Age. So I might go, proportional, I want to have 5 5-year-olds, 5 6-year-olds, 5 7-year-olds, 5 8-year-olds. Proportional, everyone's in the same equal group. Disproportional, I might have 5 5-year-olds, 6 6-year-olds, 15 7-year-olds. Now, the reason why I would do that is for 2 reasons. One, I might want to try to reflect the population. So if there are only 5 5-year-olds, if there are 10 5-year-olds at school, I might want half of those. If there are 14 6-year-olds, I might want 7 of those. So I'm taking half of each group. And if there are 30 15-year-olds, I might take 15 of those. So I've gone I'm going to make sure it looks as close as possible at the school. I'll take 50% of each of those groups. And it works really well on another way too. You can weight it the other way. If I know that Pākehās are going to be the dominant response to most of my questionnaires and surveys, I might only survey 100 of them, but I might survey 500 Māori and Pasifika peoples. And that loads the Māori and Pasifika story up and gives me something that stops the European story dominating, the Pākehā story dominating.
So what would you base that on? That you know, or you think that the Pākehā would be more responsive than the other ethnicities?
Okay, so if I was doing a bit of research on public perceptions of poverty.
I just wondered if it was the method that you were using that they'd be more accessible.
I go straight down to the question. So what are public perspectives of poverty? I know that predominantly from what I've read in research-wise is that a very Pākehā perspective is that poverty is a choice. And I'm aware that though that's not the only story. So in order to be able to get a more balanced picture, I will load the other groups up that can give me a different story to the Pākehā story that tends to dominate. And when I'm analysing it with that knowledge. So I'm not saying I have got a random sample anymore. I'm saying I have got a stratified sample and I've loaded up my Māori and Pasifika group because I'm aware that their voice is not heard.
So do you ever think about the reasons why, like for a lot of Māori, like they're being asked to participate in so many things over the course of the history that they have become mistrustful, so they don't engage?
Yeah, this is what is really cool about this class. You're bringing up the stuff that researchers are talking about all the time. The reality is everyone's getting over-researched in New Zealand. The amount of times you get phone calls, we got to do a research project. The door knocking, the history of research and colonisation, particularly the early stories, so anthropology and right down at the beginning would see Māori and Pasifika not so much as savage, but as noble savages, and talk about them and write about them that way, and it would see African, Aboriginal as savage, and the researchers would write about these cultures in that way. So there's been a huge slap in the face sort of thing. So if I was doing this, I'm only giving you examples. I haven't actually done that of loading that group up, but I would need to be known within the community. I'd need to be trusted. I need to be trusted in the community, and I'd probably switch to a qualitative one instead of a quantitative one. And one of the things about quantitative research that people are tired about is being called a number. When they're turned into a number by researchers, or when they get misquoted and stuff. So, yeah. And cluster research sampling is just selecting plain groups. Right, we will just survey all this school, survey all this school, survey this school, survey this hospital, survey this hospital. That's the sampling that's used in quantitative. In qualitative research and in mixed method sampling, the types of sampling methods are very, very different. Now, you would have noticed on the MindMeister map that I did that I've got no idea what convenient sampling is. I'll confess to you, I've never used that term in my life. So, I have no idea what convenient sampling is. Perhaps they're just selecting convenient groups. That's exactly what it means. Convenient sampling is selecting convenient groups that are at your disposal. So, and that's, so if I'm researching with young people now, I've got links with a whole lot of organisations around New Zealand. So conveniently, I could go to those organisations first to get some young people. Quota sampling is very similar to the approaches used in quantitative researching. It's selecting, giving yourself a number and saying, I'm going to get X amount of groups. So I'm supporting a young master's student on her master's research on young people's experiences of hope and poverty. And she's doing 4 focus groups with 6 students in each focus group. So that's an example of quota sampling. I'm only going to get 4 groups and I'm going to have 6 students in all. The one that I use most often is purposive or criterion based. What that means is I'm selecting people who are actually useful for my study. They have a purpose. Their story is useful for my study. Snowball, which I use for talking to a woman from prison, is when I would say, hey Lisa, do you know anyone that's had experience of prison? And you'd say, yeah, give me some names, and then go, can you get them to pass it on? And you'd go to T and say, hey, I've heard Fiona's doing some research. Do you have anyone that she can be part of it? And then T might go to Cliff, I've heard Dr. Foo's doing some research. Do you know anyone? So Snowball is literally gathering people through word of mouth. And comprehensive, which is considered a qualitative approach, is getting the stories of everyone. So the only time that you would really do this is when your population group is really, really small. An example for a question for me that would be able to be answered through convenience sampling is, what are the experiences of young people who were once part of the Killer Bee gang? So the Killer Bee gang was a very, not small, but it was quite a gang that the media got themselves into a huge panic about 10 years ago. So I know that group though would be no more than 50 young people, so I could get the stories of all of those young people. They now will be slightly older.
So a lot of that revolves around trust, doesn't it?
A lot of qualitative sampling is trust.
Yeah. So there must be a percentage where people are not necessarily true because they don't trust the researcher, or they're wary of what's going to happen.
Yeah, so, and that particularly is in stories of abuse, drug abuse, violence, crime. We'll go into this a little bit more later on, but there's things that we'll go into what validity is later on, but in qualitative research, it is actively known that if you ask a question and the person doesn't trust you, they're going to do one or two things: not give you a truthful answer, or give you the answer you want to hear. Because people who have been researched can read the research. They can read what the researcher wants to hear. So an example could be like on marijuana use, and someone's been selected because they've been using marijuana. But they really aren't an active user, but they know that the researcher wants to hear stories. So then they go on about, oh, I have to use about 10 joints a day, and if it's not going, I've got to do some spotting at night, and the story becomes so far-fetched. And the researcher believes everything because the researcher's busy trusting. I've found, particularly with young people, that a lot of the research that I will do with young people involves being more a youth worker than a researcher, but knowing the difference between youth work and research. So if I do a focus group for young people, just like a big interview, it will be around a whole lot of games and that, so I can actually build up some trust. And then drawing out information through activities that we do within youth work. That tends to work, but a lot of the time it is actually how long are you prepared to journey with a person. So the woman that I researched from prison, I was prepared to journey with them to today if they wanted. I saw the start of my journey as not finishing. Now that, and according to my training as a researcher, is unethical if I'm prepared to walk with them beyond the research project. But I'm sorry, I live in a society which giving back is better than taking. And so if someone gives me their story, it's told now. It's precious. So I'm going to be prepared to walk with them as long as they want, but I'm also prepared to let go of the story when they're prepared to let go of the story. Building trust as a researcher and qualitative research is the hardest thing possible. And there's huge complex words that explain it. One set of words is entic, and that basically means you're always going to be an outsider. No matter how well you try to be part of that community, even if you're part of the community, as soon as you become a researcher, you are an outsider. So how are you going to represent that community in a way that is truthful to that community. When actually, all the time you've got to admit that you're an outsider. And a lot of my qualitative research, I'll actually admit straight away that I'm an outsider to the story. In the United Nations stuff, I actually even went to the point of going, I'm not going to write this report unless I'm writing it with young people, because it's the report of young people, and then I'm not going to actually finalise this report without Karakia and the report at the beginning and the end. And so to acknowledge the journeys that we've been on together. But not all researchers are like that. The reason why I'm here is because I can engage in that sort of research. It's why I'm no longer up there.
Respect. Yeah, it's all about respect.
I just have a question. What do you call a researcher that's on the outside that uses the material that's been created by, what do you call that researcher that's
That
the
uses,
outside?
that uses the material from.
That's already,
Researcher.
no, naturally, it's like looking like that fishbowl, I saw that fishbowl experience on the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the researchers on the outside looking inside. So what's happening in the environment is natural. But that researcher that's looking at it from the outside is noting that information and will take that information to use.
So it depends on how the research is using that information.
Yeah.
If I'm reading your question right, that they're using that information inappropriately.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, I'm not too sure, I haven't examined that yet.
Okay, so in one sense they're on the outside and they're just taking an observation of what's going on the inside.
Yeah.
They're nothing more than a researcher. Okay, at that point, because that's what researchers are doing all the time, on the outside taking information on the inside. Even if they're on the inside, they have to step to the outside to start to.
What if they don't step on the inside to make a contribution
Then
to
they're
that?
unethical,
They're
in my
voyeurs.
opinion. But they wouldn't agree with that up there.
When does the researcher become a voyeur?
What my answers.
So if they're taking
Well, that's what it is.
taking
You're just
information,
looking.
if they're taking information that's been there presented to them on the inside, and they're not doing that catalytic validity thing we talked about last week, where they're going back to see if the story is correct on the inside, they're showing no real respect to those people at all.
Yeah, that's
So-
what also.
Then it's not really research.
So therefore, I would see it, in my opinion, as unethical.
Unethical.
But that's because I'm being grounded in the qualitative field. And the quantitative field, they'll go, you never need to go on the inside anyway.
Yeah.
But in the qualitative field, we understand our whakapapa as researchers, and so we know we've got to do the catalytic validity. We have to step back and we have to say, look, I'm not part of your community. I've been standing on the right outside of the fishbowl, but this is a story I've got. Is this your story? And then the community can go, yes, this is my story or not. Okay, and that way, in a qualitative sense, that researcher has done something ethical as well. They've got a valid story, but if they've gone and written a story,
About other people's stories.
and they've done that in a way that does not reflect that community, then they are unethical.
Well, they're a journalist.
They're a journalist.
I was about to go down
Lisa, I'll
that
get you to
line.
turn that off for a sec. I'll just finish this morning section. I did have an activity,